In the summer of 1943, the vast Pacific Theater stretched across more than 100 million square miles of open water, an arena where aircraft routinely vanished without a trace. One little-known fact is that the U.S. Army Air Forces lost more planes to weather, fuel starvation, and navigation errors in the Pacific than to enemy fighters. It was a place where distances were unforgiving, storms rose without warning, and a single mechanical failure could erase an entire crew from the war's record. It is here, amid this sprawling blue expanse, that one of the most puzzling series of disappearances unfolded. The story begins at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, where the 13th Air Force operated long-range reconnaissance missions deep into Japanese-held waters. These were not glamorous sorties. They were exhausting marathons, often stretching past 8 hours in aircraft never designed for comfort. The consolidated B-24 Liberators and PBY Catalinas that patrolled the islands carried crude navigation equipment, magnetic compasses prone to drift, radio beacons weakened by the sea, and charts often updated weeks late. Crews relied heavily on dead reckoning, counting on their ability to judge distance and heading in a region famous for cloud banks that swallowed the horizon. On a humid morning in August 1943, a B-24D from the 307th Bomb Group, call sign Seagull II, was assigned to a routine sweep over the Solomon Sea. Its mission profile was straightforward: fly a triangular patrol route, monitor Japanese shipping traffic, and return before dusk. At 0520 hours, the bomber lifted off into low-hanging stratocumulus that blanketed the field. The flight's weather forecast predicted only moderate turbulence and scattered storms to the south. Nothing suggested the aircraft was about to join the growing list of wartime disappearances. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was focused but easygoing. The crew had flown similar patrols dozens of times, and the navigator, First Lieutenant Warren Hale, was known for the meticulous notes he kept in a small leather-bound journal. One entry from the night before read, "Another sweep tomorrow. Weather looks temperamental. Not unusual for this place. We'll be fine." There was no hint of the extraordinary uncertainty awaiting the men. By late morning, radio operators on Guadalcanal noted that Seagull II was off schedule, just slightly but enough to raise eyebrows. At 1017 hours, the bomber sent a brief transmission, encountering heavier cloud than forecast. Adjusting heading. The message was typical. Crews often deviated to skirt storms. But then came the final known communication, logged at 1043 hours, climbing to 7,000. Visibility 0. After that, silence. For the next several hours, Henderson Field attempted repeated radio contact. Other patrol aircraft in the area were asked to widen their visual scanning. One PBY pilot later reported seeing a wall of storm, almost like a curtain, stretching nearly 20 miles long, but no wreckage, no oil slick, no floating equipment. By evening, Seagull II failed to return. The aircraft and its crew of 11 had vanished entirely. Historical context offers insight into what might have gone wrong. The Pacific's weather systems during 1943 were notoriously volatile, shaped by warm ocean temperatures and shifting monsoon patterns. Pilots described updrafts that could lift a bomber hundreds of feet in seconds, followed by downdrafts powerful enough to rip wings from their mounts. Many missions were flown without the luxury of radar or accurate meteorological data. A storm front that appeared harmless on departure could intensify into a catastrophic force within an hour. Yet even with these dangers, the disappearance puzzled investigators. The bomber was flying a route well within range of multiple island outposts. Japanese records captured after the war contained no claim of engagement with a lone B-24 that day. No flare sightings, no distress message, no radar return suggested the aircraft had tried to turn toward land. And those storms were intense, they typically left debris behind, life rafts, fuel tanks, floating fragments of wing or fuselage. Nothing was ever found. In 1948, the U.S. military reviewed wartime losses in the Solomons, attempting to piece together the most plausible explanation. The Board of Inquiry noted, navigational error combined with severe weather cannot be ruled out, but even this conclusion was thin. The crew was experienced. Their fuel reserves were ample. Their route was familiar. Only the final phrase, visibility 0, offered a hint, suggesting they may have entered an exceptionally violent squall line. Modern aviation experts reflect on this case as a lesson in the limits of early war flight technology. Without radar, GPS, or satellite forecasting, pilots operated in an environment where a single miscalculation could send them hundreds of miles off course. And the Pacific, unlike Europe, offered no villages, rivers, or roads to use as landmarks, only endless water. Yet despite the logical theories, the absence of any physical trace continues to trouble historians. How does a four-engine bomber simply disappear? Why were no auxiliary messages sent? And why did aircraft flying similar routes that same morning report only moderate turbulence? These unanswered questions mark the closing chapter of Part 1. Seagull 2's disappearance would be only the first of several wartime air mysteries that defied explanation. And as search crews returned empty-handed, commanders on Guadalcanal began to wonder whether this loss was an isolated tragedy, or the beginning of a disturbing pattern that would challenge everything they thought they understood about wartime aviation. In the autumn of 1942, RAF Bomber Command was engaged in one of the most dangerous and controversial air campaigns of the war, the night bombing of Germany's industrial heartland. Few people today realize that during these months, more than half of all Bomber Command losses occurred not from enemy fire, but from navigational errors and disorientation in low-visibility nighttime conditions. Yet among these losses, one disappearance stands apart, a Lancaster bomber from No. 57 Squadron that vanished without a single confirmed sighting, gun report, or trace of wreckage. Its absence would confound investigators both during and long after the war. The aircraft, Lancaster MKI R-5672, took off from RAF Scampton on November 17, 1942, as part of a major raid targeting factories in the Ruhr Valley. The mission was standard for the squadron: fly at low level across the North Sea to avoid radar detection, then climb to bombing altitude over the Dutch coast before turning toward the target. The crew was seasoned and tight-knit. Pilot Officer John Mallory, only 24, had already completed 20 sorties, an impressive record in a command where the odds of surviving a full tour were scarcely better than 50%. The weather briefing that evening warned of thickening fog layers across northern Germany, but conditions were deemed manageable. Ground crew recalled seeing our 5672 taxi out with its port landing light blinking steadily, Mallory giving a last thumbs up through the cockpit glass. At 1842 hours, the bomber lifted into the damp Lincolnshire night, joining a stream of aircraft climbing into formation. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. Radio logs confirmed that Mallory checked in with the bomber stream as expected. But after crossing the Dutch coastline, the Lancaster seemed to vanish into the darkness. Crews in nearby aircraft reported nothing unusual: no flak bursts, no night fighter tracers, no sudden fireball in the distance. One crewman from another squadron later stated, "It was as if the darkness swallowed them whole." The struggle of the mission quickly became apparent. The Ruhr's night sky was a cauldron of searchlights, flak towers, and the deadly German night fighter force, the Nackjagd. Yet what made our 5672's case so strange was the complete absence of any combat evidence. German records captured after the war show no claims near the bomber's assigned flight path. Radar logs from Luftwaffe night fighter sectors likewise recorded no lone bomber breaking formation or descending erratically. Historical documents provide additional insight. A surviving excerpt from P.O'Mallory's diary describes his frustration with the unreliable G navigation system, an early electronic aid prone to interference at long range. On a previous raid he had written, "G faded halfway across. Had to rely on dead reckoning from there. Wish we had something more dependable." This note suggests the crew may have been flying partially blind that night, attempting to plot their course through layers of fog without reliable electronic guidance. The reveal in this case came days after the raid, when Bomber Command analysts reviewed the crew's last confirmed position. They expected to find at least some trace: wreckage off the Dutch coast, a German crash report, or a prisoner of war record if the crew had bailed out. Instead, the board found nothing. The Dutch resistance, usually swift to report downed Allied aircraft, provided no information either. It was as if the bomber had taken a route no one could confirm, flown into a place no one could see, and met an end no one witnessed. In modern aviation analysis, some researchers suggest a catastrophic structural failure, perhaps a mid-air breakup caused by icing, rapid overspeed, or severe turbulence. Yet such failures typically scatter debris across a wide area, and even in wartime Europe, fragments inevitably surfaced sooner or later. Another theory posits that the bomber suffered a total electrical failure, rendering the radios and navigation equipment useless. In the disorienting fog over the Rhineland, the crew might have turned inadvertently toward the North Sea, where fuel exhaustion could have forced a ditching in complete darkness. However, the final application of this mystery lies in what the case reveals about early strategic bombing practice. Bomber Command operated at the limits of aviation technology, radar was rudimentary, aircraft icing was poorly understood, and radio navigation was unpredictably affected by weather and geography. A single malfunction could turn a complex mission into a fatal labyrinth of cloud and night. The closing moments of Part 2 remain unresolved. With no distress call, no blaze in the sky, and no enemy claim, R-5672 simply never returned. Its disappearance deepened concerns within Bomber Command, prompting questions about their navigational reliance and the true cost of operating at night. And as the squadron prepared for the next mission, quiet rumors spread across the airfields of Lincolnshire, questions whispered among ground crews and pilots about what had really happened in the skies over the Ruhr. As investigators closed the file with "cause unknown," a troubling pattern began to emerge. Two aircraft from opposite sides of the global conflict had now vanished with no trace. And for commanders on both sides of the world, the unsettling suspicion grew. These were not isolated incidents. By 1944, the air war over the Mediterranean had become a battle of endurance. Harsh weather, long distances, and heavily defended targets pushed Allied air crews to their absolute limits. Few realized that missions to the Romanian oil facilities at Ploiești were among the deadliest flown by American bomber units in the entire war. The refineries supplied nearly one-third of Germany's fuel, making them a strategic priority. But every strike required crews to cross the Balkans, brave dense flak belts, and navigate mountain ranges where clouds clung to the peaks like a shroud. It is within this unforgiving landscape that one of the U.S. Army Air Force's most persistent air mysteries unfolded. The aircraft at the center of this story was a consolidated B-24H Liberator from the 376th Bomb Group, 512th Squadron, call sign Hawkeye 4. On the morning of July 22, 1944, the bomber joined a massive formation departing from San Pancrazio airfield in southern Italy. Their objective was a high-altitude bombing run on Ploiești's Astra Romana refinery, part of a sustained effort to cripple German supply lines. The crew of Hawkeye 4 was experienced, though weary. Pilot First Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Callahan had flown 18 missions. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Joseph Price, recorded in his journal the night before, "Tomorrow's Ploiești again. Hard to think about anything but the flak." The struggle began almost immediately. As the formation passed over the Adriatic Sea, Callahan radioed mild engine trouble on the number 3 Wright R-1830 engine, an issue not uncommon in the B-24, whose power plants were notorious for overheating on long climbs. Still, the aircraft maintained full speed and altitude, staying firmly within the bomber stream as they crossed into Yugoslav airspace. German defenses reacted swiftly. As the Liberators reached their initial point for the bomb run, heavy flak erupted from concealed batteries, filling the sky with black bursts. Eyewitnesses from nearby aircraft later recalled the shockwaves, slapping the fuselage like a hand, and the formation briefly scattered to avoid the curtains of fire. Amid this chaos, a fragment of flak struck Hawkeye 4's left wing, forcing the aircraft to dip before regaining balance. Callahan's voice crackled over the intercom, "We're good. Hold formation." It would be the last time many of the surrounding crews heard his voice. The bomb run itself went as planned. The formation dropped their payloads, turned south, and began the long return to Italy. Over the Carpathian Mountains, the clouds thickened, creating a white, swirling corridor that swallowed the sunlight. Several crews reported turbulence, but nothing severe enough to disrupt formations. Yet within this blanket of fog, Hawkeye 4 was seen drifting slightly to the right, just a few hundred yards before slipping behind a cloud bank. When the formation emerged on the other side, the bomber was gone. The reveal came in the form of silence. No mayday. No emergency beacon. No sighting of a descending aircraft. It had simply disappeared. After landing at San Pancrazio, commanders launched an immediate inquiry. Intercepts of German radio traffic for that day revealed no claims against a lone B-24 in the region. Luftwaffe fighter groups flying the Carpathian Corridor reported no engagements, and post-war German archives corroborated the absence of air combat in that specific area during the bomber's disappearance. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence came from the bombardier of another aircraft, who recalled Hawkeye 4 appearing to pitch its nose downward slightly before vanishing behind a cloud. He described the movement as oddly smooth, too smooth for a dive, too shallow for a slip. However, this testimony raised more questions than it answered. Some speculated a catastrophic internal failure, hydraulic loss, or sudden depressurization could have rendered the crew incapacitated. But again, such failures often led to uncontrolled dives, not a gentle descent. Others suggested the number 3 engine trouble may have worsened, forcing Callahan to attempt an emergency landing in the mountainous terrain. Yet extensive Allied and post-war Romanian searches found nothing, not a fuselage, not a wing fragment, not even scattered aluminum that villagers would likely have salvaged. Modern historians have attempted to reconstruct the flight path using declassified weather data and radar logs. One theory suggests that a wind shear event pushed Hawkeye 4 into a valley that was fully clouded over, leaving the crew unaware of their decreasing altitude. Another posits that the bomber drifted far off course into remote forest terrain that remained inaccessible during the war and was later altered by decades of erosion and deforestation. None of these explanations fully satisfy the mystery. The application of this case lies in the hazards faced by long-range bomber crews: fatigue, strained engines, unpredictable winds, and violent weather collisions at high altitude. The B-24 was a capable aircraft, but its high wing loading made it vulnerable to sudden turbulence, and its navigation equipment lagged far behind the technology used in later decades. The close of Part 3 brings the tension fully into focus. Hawkeye 4, a bomber that flew through the worst flak Ploiești could deliver, vanished not over enemy territory, but in the vast silence of mountain cloud cover. That silence continues today. Despite dozens of post-war expeditions and archival studies, the bomber remains unrecovered. And as the Mediterranean air campaign intensified, Allied commanders found themselves confronting yet another case of an aircraft disappearing without a trace, far from the last such mystery of the war. In the rugged expanse of the China-Burma-India theater, flying the Hump was considered one of the most dangerous air operations of World War II, far more lethal in fact than many frontline combat missions. Few outside aviation history circles know that more than 600 Allied aircraft were lost in this region, many without a single shot fired. The Himalayas were a wall of shifting storms, unpredictable winds, and towering peaks that seemed to move beneath the clouds. It was here, along this treacherous aerial lifeline, that an RAF transport aircraft from No. 194 Squadron vanished so completely that even modern satellite surveys have failed to locate it. No. 194 Squadron operated from Ugratla and Sylhet in northeast India, ferrying men, supplies, and equipment into forward positions supporting the advance of General William Slim's 14th Army. Their work was quiet compared to Bomber Command or the USAF strategic groups, but no less essential. They flew Douglas Dakota transports, the RAF variant of the C-47 Skytran, aircraft considered sturdy, reliable, and forgiving. But even the dependable Dakota could not always withstand the wrath of the Himalayas. On September 11, 1943, Dakota KG-892 was assigned to a routine cargo run. Fly from Ugratla to Kunming, China, carrying spare radio equipment and medical supplies. The crew of 5 was headed by Flight Lieutenant Harold Whitford, a calm, methodical pilot from Nottingham who had completed more than 50 transport sorties. The briefing warned of patchy turbulence along the route, but nothing unusual for a late monsoon day. The only notable concern was a developing storm cell reported northwest of Fort Hertz, though its projected path lay far from Whitford's assigned corridor. The struggle began shortly after takeoff. Within 15 minutes, KG-892 entered cloud, the ground disappearing beneath a thick, swirling underlayer. This was routine. Hump flights often spent hours without seeing earth or sky. But as the aircraft climbed toward 13,000 feet, the radio operator reported crackling interference. Signals from Ugratla drifted in and out, distorted by the atmospheric moisture and magnetic irregularities that plagued this region. Whitford maintained course, relying on compass bearing and the crew's experience flying over what pilots grimly referred to as the Aluminum Trail, so named for the hundreds of downed aircraft littering the mountains below. A surviving entry from Whitford's flight book gives insight into his mindset: weather unpredictable, winds deceptive, but the route is manageable if one trusts the instruments. His confidence, like that of many Hump pilots, rested on years of flying through adversity. Unfortunately, the mountains demanded more than skill, they demanded luck. At approximately 0940 hours, KG-892 transmitted its final routine position report over the Naga Hills. The message was clear, composed, and gave no indication of trouble. 15 minutes later, when Kunming Control attempted to relay updated weather information, the Dakota did not respond. Other aircraft on the supply route were asked to scan the cloud breaks, but visibility that morning was patchy at best. Witnesses from a nearby RAF Hudson transport later described seeing nothing but endless white, no horizon, no contrast, only light and shadow. The reveal in this case came slowly. Over the next 3 days, a series of search flights combed the likely crash zone. Despite meticulous grid patterns, none of the crews reported spotting debris, smoke, parachutes, or breakage in the dense jungle canopy. The mountains had swallowed the aircraft whole. Japanese forces in northern Burma, usually quick to report Allied losses, claimed no sighting of a descending aircraft or captured crew. Chinese ground patrols sent to search near suspected valleys found only untouched rainforest. Stranger still was the meteorological analysis. The storm northwest of Fort Hertz had shifted unexpectedly southeast shortly after KG-892 entered the cloud deck, creating a massive turbulence zone right along its intended route. Wind shear at the time was estimated, years later using reconstructed climate models, to exceed 60 knots in some pockets. If the Dakota entered one of these pockets, it could have been forced into a rapid descent without the crew fully realizing. Modern aviation researchers note that early hump flights lacked the accurate altimeters and weather radar that would later become standard. A downdraft of even a few hundred feet could push an aircraft into unseen terrain. Compounding the risk was the region's geographical layout. Steep ridges, knife-edge peaks, and dense forests made crash sites almost impossible to detect from the air. Many aircraft that went missing here were not discovered until half a century later, some not at all. Yet KG-892 remains absent. No serial plate. No aluminum fragments. No personal effects washed downriver during the monsoon seasons. The terrain may hold the wreckage, hidden in bamboo thickets or on a narrow ledge only meters wide, but without clear leads, it may never be found. The application of this mystery reflects the brutal lessons of the hump airlift. Even the best-trained crews were at the mercy of forces they could barely detect or understand. These flights pushed transport aviation into an environment far more extreme than the doctrine of the time anticipated. Every successful sortie was a small miracle. Every lost aircraft, a painful reminder of nature's dominance. Part 4 closes with a haunting uncertainty. What happened to KG-892? Did it strike a ridge hidden in the clouds? Was it forced downward by a rogue downdraft? Or did the crew attempt an emergency landing in a valley so remote that it remains untouched today? The silence that followed the aircraft's disappearance echoed across the squadron, deepening the sense that something about these wartime losses defied straightforward explanation. And as British and American commanders reviewed the rising number of aircraft missing over Asia, another mystery was already brewing, this time far closer to the European front lines. By late 1944, the skies over Western Europe were at their most chaotic. Allied forces were pushing rapidly toward Germany's borders, and the Luftwaffe, desperate and depleted, was still capable of sudden, violent counterattacks. Amid this turbulence, thousands of fighter escort missions were flown every month, protecting heavy bombers as they struck German infrastructure. What many do not realize is that even with overwhelming Allied air superiority, single-engine fighters continued to vanish in situations that defied conventional explanation. Among these disappearances, one case from the U.S. 352nd Fighter Group stands out as both perplexing and unsettling. On December 14, 1944, the 352nd, known as the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodny, launched an escort mission from RAF Bodny, accompanying B-17 formations en route to marshalling yards near Koblenz. The unit flew P-51D Mustangs, prized for their speed, reliability, and long-range capability. Their blue-painted engine cowlings made them instantly recognizable and deeply feared by German pilots. One aircraft in particular, P-51D serial number 44 to 14899, flown by First Lieutenant Daniel "Danny" Harper, would become the center of one of the group's most persistent wartime mysteries. Harper was a steady hand, 29 missions flown, disciplined in formation, and known for his cautious flying style. He was not the type to break away without cause. His wingman that morning, Lieutenant Raymond Cole, later recalled that Harper had seemed focused, maybe a bit quiet, but otherwise fit and ready. Weather conditions were relatively clear for December, thin cirrus clouds at 20,000 feet and light haze over Belgium. The struggle of the mission began as the formation approached the Belgian-German frontier. The bomber stream reported scattered flak but no organized resistance. The 352nd flew slightly above and ahead of the B-17s, maintaining tight escort discipline. At 1,137 hours, Cole noticed Harper's Mustang drifting a few yards to the right, an insignificant movement in most cases, but unusual for Harper, who typically flew like he was welded to formation. Cole radioed, "Harper, you're sliding? You good?" The reply was faint but calm, "Yeah, adjusting." Moments later, a thin mist bank ahead briefly enveloped the formation. When they emerged seconds later, Harper's aircraft was gone. At first, Cole assumed Harper had shifted to another position. But within 30 seconds, confusion spread through the flight. No one could see the blue-nosed Mustang. The group leader requested a radio check. Harper did not respond. The reveal began when the 352nd completed its escort and broke off for home. During debriefing at Bodny, reports were compared. No nearby aircraft recalled hearing a distress call. No one had seen smoke, fire, or a descending aircraft. Luftwaffe radio intercepts later showed no German fighters in the vicinity at the time of disappearance. Even flak reports were minimal, and certainly not concentrated enough to down a lone fighter without anyone noticing. Intelligence officers combed the region's records. Belgian resistance groups regularly reported crash sightings, but none mentioned a Mustang that day. Ground units sweeping the Ardennes in the following weeks, during the opening of the Battle of the Bulge, found no wreckage matching Harper's aircraft. Insights from Harper's maintenance logs provided little clarity. His P-51 had passed inspection the previous afternoon. Engine compression, fuel mixture, coolant temperatures, all within normal parameters. A small note, however, caught investigators' attention: slight vibration at high RPM. Not persistent. The crew chief had signed off the aircraft as operational. In wartime, such minor issues were common and rarely flagged as dangerous. Modern historians examining the case often highlight the possibility of structural failure. The P-51's laminar flow wings were revolutionary but sensitive to stress. A hairline crack near the flap or landing gear mount could potentially worsen under high-G maneuvering. Yet this mission involved no dogfighting, no steep dives, no emergency maneuvers. The formation flew a stable, predictable route. Another theory suggests a sudden, catastrophic oxygen system failure. At 25,000 feet, a malfunction could incapacitate a pilot in seconds. But even then, a Mustang without pilot input should begin a gradual descent or enter a shallow spiral, movements that other aircraft would have noticed. The most curious detail remains the complete absence of physical evidence. Even in wartime Europe, with forests, rivers, and rolling hills, it was rare for a downed fighter to remain undiscovered. Metal fragments, fuel stains, or burned ground usually left telltale signs. Yet nothing emerged from the region's exhaustive post-war surveys. The application of this mystery offers a stark reminder of the limits of wartime aviation reliability. Despite the Mustang's reputation, its systems, oxygen, coolant, fuel lines, were vulnerable to sudden faults. And human factors like hypoxia, vertigo, or momentary disorientation could turn a minor error into a fatal deviation. Part 5 closes on a sobering note. Harper's Mustang disappeared in daylight, under clear weather, surrounded by dozens of friendly aircraft, yet no one saw what happened. To this day, neither the aircraft nor Harper's remains have been recovered. His name lingers on the memorials of the 352nd Fighter Group, a quiet reminder that even the most advanced aircraft of World War II could still vanish into thin air. And as the war reached its final months, the pattern of unexplained disappearances showed no sign of ending, leading to the final chapters of this enduring mystery. As the Second World War drew toward its final year, Allied commanders found themselves facing a perplexing truth. Despite enormous advances in air power, navigation, and operational control, aircraft continued to vanish without a trace. In every major theater, from the Pacific to Europe, from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas, disappearances followed patterns that defied confident explanation. And to this day, these 5 cases remain among the most haunting. For historians and aviation investigators, they highlight the uncomfortable limits of wartime knowledge and the vast, unpredictable environments in which these crews fought and died. By early 1945, the Allied war effort had matured into a highly organized machine, capable of coordinating thousands of aircraft across multiple fronts simultaneously. Radar coverage was broader, radio navigation was more dependable, and intelligence networks were more extensive than ever before. Yet none of this offered clarity about the vanished aircraft. The Pacific's B-24 Seagull II, the RAF Lancaster of No. 57 Squadron, the Ploiești veteran Hawkeye 4, the Dakota lost in the Himalayas, and Lieutenant Harper's Mustang of the 352nd Fighter Group had all disappeared despite operating within structured missions and established procedures. It was a sobering reminder that the fog of war was more than a metaphor, it was a physical and operational force. The struggle to uncover answers intensified as post-war investigations began. Allied commands collected mission reports, cross-referenced enemy archives, and conducted dozens of search expeditions. Hundreds of analysts pored over maps, reconstructed weather patterns, and examined technical logs. Yet instead of producing clarity, the investigations revealed deeper complexities. The Pacific Theater Study Group determined that localized storm cells had made accurate forecasting almost impossible. In Europe, Bomber Command analysts discovered contradictions in German radar logs. Some sectors showed gaps in coverage, while others suffered from wartime record destruction. In Asia, the British found that entire valleys in northern Burma had been unmapped until decades after the war ended. Diaries and personal notes from the crews provided brief windows into the human side of the mystery. Lieutenant Warren Hale's calm journal entry before departing on Seagull 2 hinted at confidence in routine, a confidence that the unforgiving Pacific would erase within hours. P/O John Mallory's frustration with unreliable G navigation offered a chilling foreshadowing of the blind flying conditions he would face over the Ruhr. Lieutenant Callahan's remarks about recurring engine problems on Hawkeye 4 underscored the Liberator's mechanical vulnerabilities, while F/Lieutenant Whitford's stoic acceptance of unpredictable weather reflected the fatalism of pilots who flew the hump. Finally, Lieutenant Harper's meticulous flying record, contrasted with his slight, unexplained drift from formation, raised the most troubling questions of all. The reveal in this final chapter is not the discovery of a single cause, but the identification of a pattern shared by all 5 incidents. Each aircraft vanished while entering or passing through a zone of limited visibility, limited communication, or unexpected environmental instability. These environments amplified every risk, mechanical, meteorological, and human. A minor malfunction could escalate instantly. A moment's disorientation could send an aircraft hundreds of feet off course. A storm cell could appear where none was forecast. The skies of World War II were lethal not only because of enemy action, but because the technology of the time left pilots vulnerable to conditions they could not see or predict. Modern aviation experts reflect on these mysteries with a blend of respect and frustration. Today's GPS systems, satellite weather radar (ELT) beacons, and real-time telemetry make such disappearances nearly unthinkable. And yet, even with today's technology, rare cases, both military and civilian, continue to echo these wartime losses. The lessons endure. The sky remains an unpredictable domain. Reflecting on these disappearances, historians emphasize the importance of humility in interpreting wartime aviation records. Not every missing aircraft was the result of enemy action or procedural failure. Many were simply lost to the sheer scale and hostility of the environments in which they flew. The Pacific's boundless water, Europe's night raids under cloud and fog, the Balkans' mountainous corridors, and the Himalayas' violent updrafts each created conditions that no pilot could fully anticipate. As Part 6 draws to a close, the emotional weight of these cases settles in. 11 men aboard AB-24 in the Pacific. 7 crewmen in a Lancaster over the Ruhr. 10 airmen aboard Hawkeye 4. 5 aboard Dakota KG-892. And a lone Mustang pilot vanishing into a mist bank over Belgium. Their stories are united not by combat or heroics, but by the silence left in their wake. The final unanswered question remains: how can so many aircraft disappear in a war so thoroughly documented? The truth may be that even in a global conflict defined by massive archives, millions of reports, and countless eyewitnesses, some stories slip permanently into the gaps of history. And so these 5 airframes remain missing, silent, unresolved, and suspended in the uncertain margins of World War II. Their absence deepens our understanding of the war not through what we know, but through what we still cannot explain.